Hey Booktube, Science Fiction Reads here with another edition of Recent Reads and Book Haul. I've not read much since my last video. I've just had, I don't know, a reading slump, I guess, where I just not, even though I'm interested in what I'm reading and actually really enjoying what I'm reading these past couple weeks, I just can't be bothered to read very much. So it's going to be a short video. I've read very little, but I'm liking it. So these two books here, they must have been in a book haul like a year ago or something, and at the time I knew nothing about them. I think Sean Standfast commented, gave me a little bit of context, and maybe somebody else, but I had never heard of this author, or certainly not heard of his work, and it's what I'm enjoying lately. So this is Neil R. Jones' Professor Jameson stories. There's 3 or 4 per book. Now, Neil R. Jones wrote a bunch of science fiction in the 30s, 40s, 50s, but he had this reoccurring character which first appeared in Amazing Stories like in 1931. I think everything I read here was from 31, 32, maybe 33. And I guess they were quite popular at the time. Professor Jameson is a scientist in the 50s, so 20 years in the future when this was written, who becomes obsessed with the idea of not necessarily immortality, but preserving his body for all time or as long as possible. And he thinks about a couple different ways and experiments and stuff, but ultimately decides after his death, he's going to have his corpse sealed in a rocket and put in Earth orbit. And he's got some technology to like push it away from, you know, approaching asteroids or spacecraft or anything. Not that there's any spacecraft at the time that Professor Jameson is alive. I don't think there's any space travel or anything. Even though it's 20 years in the future when it was written. I think he's just a mad scientist kind of guy. So he dies of old age, and his nephew carries out his wishes of just putting him in this secret rocket the guy built and putting him up into orbit. And that is where his body lies for 40 million years before these comical, just awesome, they're kind of like Daleks. These little robots just happen upon the Sol system. They're called the Zoromes. They are robot bodies, but they came from a biological race. And at some point in their life cycle, I guess when they're close to death or old age, they have their brain removed, put into, you can see the human superimposed over the body, but they have their brains put in these robot bodies. And then they just travel around the universe exploring, literally just having fun adventures. They come across Professor Jameson's corpse. They bring his little rocket into their spaceship. They dissect him. They're like, we can get this brain going again. So they remove his brain, put it in a Zorome robot body, and he wakes up. And at the end of the first story, which is really just a prologue, he's like, he's been introduced to them. He's been told like, hey, you can travel with us. Not all of us are even Zoromes. Some of the robot people, they're other biological creatures like Professor Jameson who had their brains put in a body and travel around with the Zoromes having adventures and exploring. But he has this like existential moment where he's like, I'm the last human, 40 million years in the future. Do I want to just end it now? Like, do I want to go on like this? It's actually quite a profound moment. It was pretty neat. Ultimately, one of the robot men, I think the leader of this expedition, talks him into like sticking around, and they go on their first, well, he goes on his first adventure with them, which I think is the planet, yeah, the planet of the double suns. So each story is kind of like a mystery with a lot of peril and occasionally death. And they go to this planet that has 2 different suns, one red, one blue, and there's a mystery to solve. They find like a big genocidal graveyard, but there doesn't seem to be any predators. But when the one sun eclipses the other or something, the strange light or something gives access to an alternate dimension, and these creatures from that dimension drive everything on this planet crazy, and so they all those creatures all killed themselves. It's really wild. For the 30s, I did not expect an alternate dimension or like semi-hard SF. When he gets into some science stuff, it's actually not terrible. They go to the planet next door, the next planet in the solar system, and there's a race there, and all those dead bodies were from one of their previous attempts to colonize, and basically the Zoromes solved the mystery, although not until a bunch of them have been killed trying to figure this out. The whole thing about the Zoromes is they're basically immortal unless their metal head where their brain is damaged. So this first adventure of Professor Jameson does not actually go very well. He gets separated from the rest, and he gets stranded in space on a derelict spacecraft. And he just circles these two suns and these two planets for a few hundred years, just using his telescope to watch the other planet that still has a civilization until they regain the ability of spaceflight, re-attempt to colonize this planet with this strange access to another dimension, and discover his derelict spacecraft. And then he teams up with them, goes back to that planet, finds the rest of his comrades who were trapped at the bottom of an ocean for 700 years. And they wage war on the alternate dimension and basically set up a situation where this planet is now free to be colonized by the neighboring planet. It was pretty neat. It was more than I expected. And a couple of those creatures from that second planet undergo the surgery, have their brains put in these Zorome bodies, and they travel around with Professor Jameson and the robots. It's really cool. And I just kept reading. So this is the second collection. In the 60s, I think 1967, 5 of these collections were put out by, I think this is, Ace Books. They all have awesome cover art by Gray Morrow, who has the most epic name of any science fiction painter. So there's a couple of 3 of them. They're just these robot men with funky little legs and tentacle arms, which does make sense. We eventually get to the home planet of the Zoromes, and the biological versions of them do have tentacles and stuff. It's really neat. So I had a lot of fun with this. So I read the second one, and I had a lot of fun with that. And then I tracked down the other 3, because there was only 5 collections put out in the 60s. I bought them, and those are what I'm going to show off in a second here. But I'm not going to go into any more detail about these, because I think I'm going to do a separate video about them once I've read all 5. Not all of his short stories are collected in these 5. I think it's just kind of the best of. I'm going to want to read the ones that weren't collected, but I'd have to try and find them online. They were all published in Amazing Stories and a couple other magazines, but all in the 30s, 40s. I've got plenty of those magazines, but they don't go back that far. So yeah, I'm really enjoying these. This guy and these stories were a big inspiration for Isaac Asimov, which makes sense because he was big into robotics, and these little robot men, which I guess are cyborgs, they do have a biological brain, really inspired him. And there's a couple instances where I could see a direct inspiration for stuff that Asimov wrote. So I guess I won't go into any more detail about those, because I'll probably put out a separate video. But on to the new books. The next one was Professor Jameson number 3. 3 more stories. I did read this one as well. Space War. Yeah, these ones have little illustrations of these guys. I just find them so comical. They're supposed to be like the apex of like sentient creatures in the galaxy as they travel around solving problems and discovering things. But really, they're just a bunch of comical robots. Number 4, Twin Worlds. I'm currently reading this one. I just started this last night. I love the cover art. I think this one has a comical picture too. Yeah, just one of the robot men running away from some creature. I love these guys. In the last one, Doomsday on Ajat, maybe. I'll be reading this one, and shortly after that, I'm probably going to do a video about these. So other than that, I got another Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell, Lucifer's Hammer. I think this one's been recommended to me. This is in terrible shape, but it was given to me by a coworker who's been going through some boxes of old books lately, and every now and then just shows up to work with a bag of books, and I keep what I want and I donate the rest. Okay, these next three, the last three, I got from a local bookseller I've mentioned before. He runs an online science fiction fantasy bookstore called the Bookstore on Pluto. And he told me that at least one person has found him through me and made purchases. That's awesome. I like that. So this one is, I'm excited about this because I've only read one short story by this author, and it was years and years ago. This is The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I did not even look at this in detail when I bought it. I thought it was just the novella, but it's actually a short story collection. And the first story is that novella. It's also got Celiphaeus, The Silver Key, Through the Gates of the Silver Key, The White Ship, and The Strange High House in the Mist. So H.P. Lovecraft, I've only read one short story of his, but I've always been interested in his stuff, especially like the weird dream world stuff. So I'm excited to read this. I've never even seen an H.P. Lovecraft collection of short stories other than new at the bookstore. And I very rarely buy new because I just don't have the money. A collection I was surprised I don't have by Arthur C. Clarke, Tales of 10 Worlds. I got this mostly because it's a Signet edition, right? I think that's right. Yeah. Signet put out a bunch of Arthur C. Clarke books in the 70s. And they all look like this, the same font, the same general look. All the spines look the same. Oh, that's right. They used to be here until recently. I moved them over here, but they look really good on the shelf, all lined up, and I don't have this. And I didn't really check to see. I probably have most of these stories in his other collections, but just a quick glance, I don't recognize a couple of the titles of these. So this is one I might pick up soon, or it might collect dust on the shelf for years. I don't know, but I do love Arthur C. Clarke, especially his short stories. And the last one, the one that really prompted my whole purchase from the bookstore on Pluto, another folio edition book, another history book. This is The Conquest of Mexico, written in the 1800s by William H. Prescott. I just love reading or learning about the Aztecs, and especially the kind of first contact situation with the Aztecs and Cortez and all that. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Cortez is like one of my favorite people from history, which is, you know, maybe a weird thing to say. He did kind of begin a genocide, but you know, it's still, it's just interesting. It's fascinating stuff. Will I read this 600, almost 700 page book? Probably one day, no idea when, but it will go on my shelf over here with the rest of my Folio Society books. And that's it. I have not done much reading. I think I'm getting out of my reading slump, and I'm gonna pick up the pace a bit. As for new books, though, there are not going to be many many book hauls anymore. I just can't make it work financially. I bought a new car, and it's just not as much disposable cash. However, I am going on vacation in 2 weeks to the same place I went last year, and I did come back with a nice book haul. There's a crazy, I can't remember the name of the bookstore, but they have like 300, 400,000 books, and their science fiction section was very impressive. I will be going there and not thinking too much about the money I spend until I get back home. I'll deal with that. That'll be future Matt's problem. I'm gonna buy some books. It's gonna be good. Other than that, though, the book hauls are gonna slow down, but more to come. I think I'm going to put out a video on these Professor Jameson stories and maybe kind of just highlight the author Neil R. Jones. I don't think he wrote too much. I think he only wrote the 30s, 40s, 50s, despite living up until the mid-80s. But I think I'll put out a video about this because I'm loving this series. And considering the time it was written, I feel like it's kind of important to the early history of SF. So I might put something out on that. Otherwise, thanks for watching, as always, and see you next time.